Long before there were paved roads or massive cities, the North American continent stretched out for thousands of miles. It was a land of staggering ecological diversity, covered in towering forests, deep valleys, and endless sweeping plains. And this massive landscape was already heavily populated. Hundreds of distinct Native American civilizations, like the Cherokee, Sioux, and Navajo, had lived here for millennia. They possessed deep, rich cultures and lived in careful harmony with the earth. Meanwhile, across a dangerous ocean, 15th-century Europeans were driven by intense curiosity about the unknown and a drive to secure new wealth. This created a direct conflict between a resource-driven Europe and societies that viewed the land as a sacred trust. The physical reality for early English colonists was incredibly harsh. When settlers arrived in Jamestown in 1607, they were met with an unfamiliar climate and severe food shortages. Over half of them died from starvation and disease in the very first year. The survival of the remaining colonists was the result of agricultural knowledge shared by the local Native Americans, who taught the English how to plant and forage in this new environment. Yet, as the colonial settlements began to stabilize, the English continuously pushed outward, seizing land from the very people who had provided their food and safety. At the same time, the colonial economy grew through the forced importation of enslaved Africans, who were systematically stripped of their freedom and humanity to provide labor. These settlements grew through a combination of personal survival and the systematic displacement of native populations, alongside the forced labor of enslaved people. Over the next 100 years, 13 distinct colonies expanded along the eastern coast. They developed busy ports, thriving local economies, and self-sustaining towns. Because they had to build and govern these local communities themselves, the colonists gradually began viewing themselves as uniquely American, rather than distant subjects of the English king. This animated map of the 1760s Atlantic shows a severe problem building in London. The English government had accumulated massive, unsustainable financial debt after fighting several expensive global wars. To extract this money, England made a unilateral decision. They placed heavy, direct taxes on the everyday basic goods the American colonists required to survive, like paper, glass, and tea. For the colonists, these sudden taxes were seen as a threat to their established local autonomy. The core grievance was structural. The colonists had zero representatives in the English Parliament, meaning they had no voice in the room where these taxes were being levied. They united behind the rallying cry, "No taxation without representation." This was a rejection of laws created by a distant, disconnected authority. In 1773, that frustration led to the Boston Tea Party. By destroying hundreds of chests of English tea, the colonists sent a calculated, destructive message straight to the king. The escalation arrived in 1776. Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence, claiming that every person possesses an inherent right to life and liberty. The Declaration made reconciliation impossible, claiming outright independence was an act of high treason, guaranteeing a war with the British Empire. The reality of the Revolutionary War was terrifying. A disorganized, poorly supplied colonial militia was tasked with fighting the most disciplined military force on the planet. The lowest point of the revolution occurred during the winter of 1777 at Valley Forge. Thousands died from severe cold, disease, and starvation. Washington stayed in the camp, sharing the same freezing quarters and scarce food as his troops. This presence prevented the total desertion of an army that had every reason to quit. This ability to outlast the winter gave the colonies the time they needed for foreign alliances to materialize and for the British to lose political will at home. Eventually, the arrival of foreign aid shifted the balance. France provided soldiers, heavy weapons, and naval support, altering the trajectory of the war in America's favor. In 1781, the colonists secured a victory at Yorktown. A fractured group of colonies had defeated a global superpower. Winning the war was only a prerequisite. At the 1787 Constitutional Convention, the founders faced the task of translating their survival into a permanent system of laws. The result was a government structure that replaced hereditary rule with a system of representation, setting a legal precedent that future generations would spend centuries testing and expanding.